It's better than what I could do.
He probably just.
She put the sign up after I said.
What's that?
Elgin was sitting here last week.
I'm more like, I need to sit at the desk. Hello, hello. Are you gonna be
Yes.
good if you're here?
Pretty specific.
I brought your cookies here.
No, I'm perfectly allowed to actually. Fleming, sorry. But my dog passed in the summer.
Yes.
He passed, and that was hard, just because. I mean, but it was a good time to go. I mean, he was. Oh, and he's a dog. He's a dog, and in any event, it was pretty loaded up with grief with that, and then I've been. I mean, I kind of came back from the meeting shortly after the night because I was watching Sarah Bridge. I'd actually been a member here for years, but I had kind of strayed. Let's be. Yeah. So anyway, Sarah, and I think we really, but it was kind of a compounding thing just because of, and I think it was because I had come back, kind of been, coming pretty regularly every Sunday for a year and a half, and then I had an absence, I don't know, maybe 10, well, probably about as long as my dog was alive because he was a hunting dog, and so during the falls especially, I was hunting. So anyways, it kind of hit me hard, but I kind of got through it, and then so then it was sort of a thing that we were kind of looking into the reasons why we're losing a lot of our young ministers. In any event, and then Jeff, and I've known Jeff for 35 years, and then so this whole thing comes, and he's putting his resignation on, and so anyway, the original grief that brought me here had to do with Sarah and my dog, and also talking to the council a little bit. We kind of talked about doing something on grief. Because what I was saying when I would get on some meetings is I said, when people leave, it can be really because the minister becomes the face of that church. When they leave, and for whatever reason, people are going to be attached to them, and it's grief because that was kind of explained because of my dog. Grief is.
I know, but I want to tell you, it's beautiful. It really is beautiful and insightful and wonderful. Did he write it? Or did he write it?
So that's kind of how it is there. And then I saw that Cathy was doing something on grief. And learn more. I wouldn't say learn more because it's not like you want to learn about it, but actually what I really found about my process, yes, exactly. And a lot of the things with my he went through a lot of life with me that were some really difficult times, and he carried that very strong. I mean, he didn't intentionally, but what I'm saying is having him made me a lot more calm.
Well, good evening, everyone. How are you? It looks like everybody's been here before. There's nobody that's brand new tonight, is there? Oh, there are a couple people that are If you're brand new, my name is Pastor Cathy Kolwey. Thank you very much. That jokester came with me, that's why. I like to say I know that I am a successful facilitator if people start to bring stuff to share. And that has happened. And so tonight,
Could you soften it?
just a little bit. I'm forgetting that I have the microphone this week and that I don't have to project. I'm sorry. I have preached 4 worship services today. So I'm in projection mode. I've been projecting since 10 a.m. this morning. So anyway, what I was saying is that I know that the class, I'm a successful as a facilitator if people are bringing stuff to share with me and with the group. And I'm just going to hand the microphone to you and let you introduce. I'm going to have us start with a poem tonight. Well, I have one copy, and I'll read it, but if you want to say why you brought it.
The poem was given to us by a fellow member here at Meeting House, Dave Yates, shortly after his wife passed away. And somebody gave it to him, and he thought so much of it that he passed it on to us after we had a death in our families. And it's kind of been something that we hang on to all the time because it's, to us, Bill and I, it says a lot. Yeah. You know, it's grief is not something that goes away. It changes, and it changes us. And that's kind of what the poem says. Do you have anything else?
Oh, that's it.
And so I'm going to have us kind of center ourselves tonight. I'm just going to ask you to maybe close your eyes or get comfortable, however, 2 feet on the ground, get comfortable. Take a deep breath and listen to the words of the poem. Grief. I had my own notion of grief. I thought it was a sad time that followed the death of someone you love. And you had to just push through it to get to the other side. But I'm learning there is no other side. There is no pushing through, but rather there is absorption, there is adjustment, there is acceptance. And grief is not something you complete, but rather you endure. Grief is not a task to finish and move on, but an element of yourself, an alteration of your being, a new way of seeing, a new definition of self. So thank you for sharing that with the group. There were multiple copies. Have they all been snatched up already? I may be able to make a few more copies before the end of the evening if somebody wants one. Or I could always figure out a way to email it to you as well. So thank you for grounding us in that. And one of the things that I have seen over the 3 or 4 weeks we've been together is that our stories have gotten a little deeper and we've started to share a little more. And what I will say about tonight is this. This is the hard one. Because if you're not here yet, this is gonna, what we talk about tonight is gonna feel hard. If someone would have said these things, what I'm about to say to you, if somebody would have said these things to me like 4 years ago, I probably would have sucker punched them. Really, I would have. I mean, I was not, when you're not at a place to hear, it's hard. And I believe that there are people in this room who are probably not at this spot yet. But this is why we build the language, right? So that we can continue the conversation and we can kind of get each other along and we can have the conversations as we go. Tonight, we are going to talk about, I'm going to have to flip through. That's everything we've done so far, right? Is there a hidden gift in grief? And so I just raise that as a question. I'm going to have you just 60 to 120 seconds at your table. Do you think that there is a hidden gift in grief? Yes or no, and why?
My daughter, she said, just the gratitude that you've had something that's been valuable. Because there's a lot of relationships, I mean, even family relationships that I've had that I didn't have the same kind of value. It sounds really weird, but I think it was probably it was his companion. Just on an everyday basis.
We're going to do this activity.
You know,
I don't have another copy of this, though. Otherwise, I would.
I think the same thing can be said.
But you can.
It can describe. I've lost it.
Okay. Okay.
But I'm grateful because I took a picture of your phone.
I don't think. Okay. Where's the camera? Oh, back there. Oh, okay. Okay, I'm going to pull us back together and just ask table by table. How did you answer that question? Does anybody want to share with the larger group?
What I said was that as you grieve over the loss of someone, in my case, I would say my mother and my father, that had a positive relationship with both of them. It enriches my life to reflect on the contributions they made to my life. So that's what I see the positive. The grief reminds you of all the ways that's why you grieve, because you miss them. But you realize how you've been blessed. And are they using a different mic than you use? Because I can't hear him.
You can't hear him. He said.
I heard him enough to know.
You heard him enough. Okay. You're just giving him a hard time, right? Anything else? Anything else any of the other tables want to share?
I think these people at our table would like to share.
Betty and Don Cook would like to share.
They have a more significant
Well,
story.
I think most people know that we lost our son when he was 24, which is 26 years ago. And over time, he had so many friends, and they've always stayed connected to us, and they're in our lives. We do think a lot of their kids graduated from high school this year. We were at graduation parties. One of the moms just sent me a nice note today because I sent them each a Halloween bag for their kids. So things like that. So his friends are in our life and are really a gift to us. And they're really meaningfully involved. And it isn't like, oh, they feel sorry for us. It's an interaction and mutual relationship that's really been rich and continues. So I think that's a gift to us to address our grief. And it honors him too.
And I am just going to pause right there and say that I believe the death of a child, whether it is an infant or a teenager or a young, it just goes against the nature and order of life. And it is a special kind of grief that unless you go through it, you just don't know. You know?
I'm not sure if this is right, but also because they know him well and we're so comfortable. Adam is still in all our lives, and they love to tell stories and talk about him. So when we're with them, there is that he's with us, and that's another gift that they help keep that memory alive. Because as the years go by, that isn't always the case.
Yes?
I thought as I look at grief, I view it more as a process. Because when Adam died, I kind of looked like that girl on the left side of your starting picture, that standing against the wall like this. But as you grieve, if you don't, it's a process to get you through this. And I agree with your poem. It never goes away. You just learn to deal with it and have a healthier life with it.
Anybody else? Yeah.
At my table,
Jim is managing our online guests, so.
when I was going through grief, I pictured it as music, and sometimes you get this dirge, this minor key music that's playing in your head, and sometimes you get happy clappy music, and sometimes it's just background music. And as you walk through the grief, the music never goes away, it just gets quieter. And then it becomes a bass line that just supports the music that you put on top of it for the rest of your life. And I just love that image, that it, like you said, it doesn't go away, it just gets quieter.
Yeah, grief comes in a lot of different forms, and I think with a lot of us think about grief, we think about someone's passing, because when people leave a home or leave their friends, that's also part of grief. But what I was thinking about is kind of unusual in that, think about an Irish wake, which is a form of grief, and it's usually a celebration of the person who's passed, and an opportunity for the individuals who are there to reflect on that person's life and what they have meant for them. And I think that would apply to all sorts of grief situations. And in that way is a little positive. What role did that person play? The people who we may have taken for granted in our lives, which lots of us do, people that we have seen for a long time, whether we work with them or even been in our family. But and that opportunity during this grief stage is to embed that memory with us, so that person continues to live within us.
Yeah. Sometimes when I'm feeling snarky, I say grief can be joy.
Yes.
But it can be, because, again, grief is love, and love can be joyful. So I think that's an excellent point. Yeah. Anybody else before we move on to the next slide? So the next slide is going to get into sort of the, how do we know when it happens? How do we know when it happens? I have written down somewhere, some psychiatrists that studies grief came up with this image like 20 or 30 years ago. People tend to believe that grief shrinks over time, the top line, that grief gets smaller. But that's actually not what happens. That pretty much your grief is your grief, but your capacity for empathy and compassion and life and joy grows around it. So instead of my grief getting smaller, my compassion expands. Yay, nay, what do you think? What really happens is that we grow around our grief. And this is why I say this is the hard part of the journey. Because if you haven't started that phase yet, it's hard to believe it's going to happen. You know? After 26 years, you have seen the growth that has happened around the loss. But if the loss was 3 weeks ago, I might not be there yet, right? I've heard this expression, and I think it's a really good one, that ultimately, what is life? Life is holding grief in one hand and holding gratitude in the other hand, and allowing the two to stretch you as much as humanly possible. That when we can hold grief and gratitude in equal measure, when we can be at that Irish wake and be focused in on all of the wonderful things that person has done in my life. You know, when we can hold grief in one hand and gratitude in the other, and let the both of them pull us and stretch us as far as we can, that is what life is. And I can see on people's faces that if you're only holding the grief right now, and there are moments in life when grief is all you can hold, right? You might not be at gratitude yet, and that's okay. It just means you're at a different place on the journey. But that ultimately, grief and gratitude stretch us into the most empathetic, the most compassionate, the most kind, loving people we can be.
We were in New Orleans.
Oh, talk into the mic. These are good stories. So
We were staying at a hotel near the French Quarter and all that. And sure enough, we saw one of these funeral parades right outside our room with a big jazz band playing lively music. You know how New Orleans jazz sounds, And they're carrying the coffin and all singing and everyone's smiling. And I thought, they do it different down here, don't they? That's the typical New Orleans funeral. And I thought, well, they're celebrating. They're not all sad and crying, because they're celebrating the life of whoever was deceased. To have When the Saints Go Marching In play, instead of a funeral dirge, that's a different way that the New Orleans does it.
we have Jim over here who has read, there's a book, and I'm forgetting, saying Kaddish, that gets into the Jewish traditions of mourning and how very different they are as well. And then I think of another book, what's it called? Yes. All the Ways the Dead Still Speak, which was written by a funeral director. Both of them are excellent follows up to this. that talk exactly about that, about different traditions and different beliefs that we have around funerals and grieving and stuff. Okay, I'm going to have us look at a video. Last week, we heard Stephen Colbert interview Andrew Garfield, right? This week, if my computer works, Andrew, is that his name? Yes. He's an actor. Oh, no, not. So this week, Anderson Cooper is going to interview Stephen Colbert, who also has had some major grief in his life. And both, and I don't know the full story, I believe Stephen Colbert lost a parent, and I think Anderson Cooper lost father and brother at the same time when he was very, very young. And so their full interview is 25 minutes. We're not going to listen to it all, but I highly recommend, if you're YouTube savvy, to just Google it and watch all 21 minutes of it. But this is the clip that I love.
That you have learned to, in your work, love the thing that I most wish had not happened.
I remember.
You went on to say, what punishments of God are not gifts? Do you really believe that? That you have learned to, in your words, love the thing that I most wish had not happened.
I remember.
You went on to say, what punishments of God are not gifts? Do you really believe that?
Yes. It's a gift to exist. It's a gift to exist. And with existence comes suffering. There's no escaping that. And I guess I'm either a Catholic or a Buddhist when I say those things, because I've heard those from both traditions. But I didn't learn it that I was grateful for the thing I most wish hadn't happened, is that I realized it. Mm-hmm. Is that, and it's an oddly guilty feeling.
It doesn't mean you are happy.
I don't want it to have happened. I want it to not have happened.
Right.
But if you are grateful for your life, which I think is a positive thing to do, yeah. Not everybody is, right. And I'm not always, but it's the most positive thing to do, then you have to be grateful for all of it. You can't pick and choose what you're grateful for. And then, so what do you get from loss? You get awareness of other people's loss.
Well, that's true. Empathy.
Which allows you to connect with that other person, right. Which allows you to love more deeply and to understand what it's like to be a human being, if it's true that all humans suffer.
Right.
And so, at a young age, I suffered something so that by the time I was in serious relationships in my life, with friends, or with my wife, or with my children, is that I have some understanding that everybody is suffering. And however imperfectly, acknowledge their suffering and to connect with them and to love them in a deep way that not only accepts that all of us suffer, but also then makes you grateful for the fact that you have suffered, so that you can know that about other people. And that's what I mean. It's about the fullness of your humanity. Mm. What's the point of being here and being human if you can't be the most human you can be? I'm not saying best, because you're going to be a bad person and a most human. I want to be the most human I can be. And that involves acknowledging and ultimately being grateful for the things that I wish didn't happen, because they gave me a gift.
Well, one of the things my mom would often say is that she said, you know, I never ask why me. Like, why did this happen to me? She would always say, why not me? Why would me be exempt from what has befallen everybody, countless others over the centuries? And I think that's another thing that has helped me think, Yeah, of course. Why not me? This is part of being alive. I mean, this is the suffering is the sadness, suffering. These are all you can't have happiness without having loss and suffering.
And in my tradition, that's the great gift of the sacrifice of Christ, is that God does it too. That you're really not alone. God does it too.
I heard you say something once. I just thought it was funny. You said you were saying that you don't proselytize because something about I'm going to mull it, but it was basically that you don't proselytize. More Jesus for me.
Exactly. I don't really want to proselytize. I don't necessarily want to make anybody from my point of view, more Jesus for me.
But
here at the old heaven buffet, I'm just, so I don't even have a well-defined enough cosmology to have a sense of what's going to happen. But I want to talk about that gifts of God, what's up, what punishments of God are not gifts. That's actually, I'm quoting Tolkien there. That's not me. That's Tolkien, because in the Tolkien mythos, there are elves and men, which are the children of Iluvatar, which is the one god within the Tolkien mythos.
And the elves live forever.
Elves live forever. They are part of the world.
Whom do we know who's an expert on all things Lord of the Rings? Folks, when I spent my entire teenage years reading all of Tolkien, not just The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, I'm talking Farmer Giles of Ham, Smith of Wootton Major, Leaf by Niggle. I knew I was preparing myself for something important. Why else would I ignore all my classwork, abandon sports, and achieve a paleness I have yet to shake off?
Your mom had studied theater, wanted to be an actress.
Yes, she was going to Carnegie.
Was that something that? And she was then in Haiti for reasons I'm not sure, which
I think it was Haiti. It was in the Caribbean.
And she got really sick with a tropical disease.
Yeah, like classical, like a rare tropical disease, almost like a cartoon of a disease, and she almost died.
And then, but in that process of recovery, ended up
my dad
getting
said,
married
"Will you marry me?"
Right.
And instead of having acting career, she started her own theater company, which was 11 children.
And amazing, that's how it was. But did her desire to act, which was then given up to have this family, was that something that you absorbed?
It seems obvious that would be one of my motivators.
Right.
That me, with my mom /
ward
buddy, in a way, like we became very close friends, that I would do this in some way for her, but it's just self-evident, right? It did not occur to me. Did not occur to me for many years. It really wasn't until she died that I realized a lot of what I did was still going back to making her happy from those early years after Dad and the boys died. Like, we remember distinctly when she laughed for the first time, like it was like a year later or something like that. But that's inside of you as a young person. You absorb that and digest that, but aren't necessarily aware of that until much later. I mean, when my sister Mary said a very interesting thing after Mom died, is that we were all going through this normal grief of my mother's death. And as I said after she died, like, we were so lucky to have her for so long, but how long we had her.
She was 92 when she died.
92, exactly. But that, it might seem selfish to want more of someone you've known so long, but, it merely amplifies the enormity of the room, whose door is now so quietly shut. Like, you can't ever open that door again. But on top of that, we realized, now we also lost Dad and the boys. In some ways, we were here for her because of her loss of her husband and her children. And when she went, she kind of took them with her, in a way. And so we all, or at least and I know I've talked to a couple of my brothers and sisters about this, but I assume it's a fairly general thing, is kind of re-experience that. And there had been this delayed dealing with all of that over 40 plus years. And I realized in that moment, oh, damn, I wonder if I want to still do comedy, because I kind of was doing this for her without still enjoying it and having all the love and the friendship and the camaraderie of it. But I realized, the seed crystal was make her laugh.
Conflict.
Thoughts on that? That was a lot in 7 minutes. But what stood out to you? What bubbled to the top from that video?
Just that some of these realizations or learning from this really hit him later in his life. He didn't take it all in or process it all at once. He just later down the line, he said, oh, you know, I learned that, or oh, I learned that. So grief goes on, but so do the positive lessons maybe.
I wrote down, love the things I wished had not happened, which is odd that I've never thought about that because I've had several losses the last couple of years. But I was thinking about the church. Love the thing that I wish had not happened, the things that I wish had not happened. Yeah.
I was struck by his definitive statement that suffering is a part of life. And I think I try to avoid that part of my life.
We all do. Yeah.
Welcome to the club.
Welcome to the club. Yeah. And life changes when you kind of acknowledge and embrace this idea that suffering is part of life. Yeah. Anybody else? What bubbled up for you? I think it's on already. Did you want to say something? No? Okay.
I was most struck by Anderson Cooper. Just that raw human emotion of reading something that just took his breath away.
Yeah. Yeah. Both of them have very similar stories. So Stephen Colbert, I think there was 11 children, and there was a car accident where it took 2 of his brothers and his dad when he was like 8 years old. And he was the youngest, and they lost the 2 boys that were closest to him. You know, so then there became this big gap between him and the rest of the kids. Anderson Cooper, I think, lost a brother and a father as well. So they're you know, and you know, and then it became him and his mom, and they were like the dynamic duo through most of his teenage years and into adulthood. I don't know if you know, his mom was Gloria Vanderbilt. Yeah, so the famous, the Gloria Vanderbilt. So they, you know, so it doesn't surprise me that Anderson Cooper kind of feels that just raw, can't hold it back emotion, because the stories are very similar. Everybody grieves differently. Everybody's loss is different, and yet it feels good when you can find commonality in other people's stories. Yeah.
Well, when Stephen Colbert talked about, you know, if you want love life, you have to love it all, and loss is grief is something that's just part of life. And then I think it was Anderson Cooper said, well, his mother always responded to somebody saying, why did it happen to me? Well, it's going to happen to somebody. And those are, and if you can believe that, then you don't spend a lot of time why. But it struck me, those are things that come at the end. They're not at the beginning. When the bad thing happens, you're going to think, why me?
Right.
And I'd like to sort out the good stuff from the bad stuff. It just struck me, especially showed how Stephen Colbert had just really gone through this. He's very thoughtful. But it was something at the end, not the beginning.
Yeah, and remember that, like, both of these men are in, what, their 50s, and they both experienced this loss between 8 and 14. You know, so they've got 40 years of processing, and still they talk about their grief as it's present. One of the other things that Anderson talks about in a different, pass the mic back to Sally, and I'll be done by the time it gets to you. One of the other things that Anderson Cooper says in this same interview is how sometimes he wishes that he had a physical scar on his face or something, you know, to just give people notice that, like, this bad thing has happened, which I think is an incredible kind of metaphor, like, to want to wear your scar outwardly so that when people meet you, they can say, oh my God, what happened? You know? It's an interesting thought. Sally, what you thinking?
I remember reading several years ago a Henry Nouwen book, and I can't tell you which one, but he talks in it about to love your life, you need to love all of it, which means the good and the bad. And until you see that God is part of all of it. And so I think one of the gifts of grief is God's in the loss too. Yeah. And you experience that. And when you experience that, you experience that God's in all of, not just the good things that happen, but in the hard things that happen too.
Yeah. And I would add, although we could debate theology all night long, I would add, God is with me in my suffering as a companion. I don't necessarily prescribe to the theology that God makes bad things happen. I don't.
I think God doesn't need to. I mean, life is life.
Right.
I mean,
thank you. Right. You know, that the world around us happens and God suffers with us as our companion. I want us to quickly move through a silent journaling activity, although it looks like a picture. You have a house in front of you. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you little journal prompts. This is not essays. You don't have to write lots and lots and lots. But this is meant to be a reflective activity. So this is not introverts unite. This is not share with your table at this point in time. This is focus in on your sheet of paper and just reflect for yourself. And I'm just going to talk you through while you fill in your grief house. Okay? So, we are going to start at the base, at the foundation. And in that foundation there, I just want you to think for a minute and write in, what are the values that govern your life? Just whatever comes to mind first. It can just be a couple of words. It doesn't have to be a big essay. I know. I'm going to fix the flashing while you guys write.
We were all former hippies, and that was like a strobe light.
I've suddenly turned into a Grateful Dead concert. Now you're going to move up to that first floor. In that box that is the first floor, I want you to just very briefly describe your grief journey, whatever one, and if you have more than one, you can pick whichever one you want. while you're on that first floor, look at the front door and write names of people that you let in. That you let in. Who know. Answer it however that answer feels right to you. And if there's nobody, you can leave it blank. And if there's a lot of people, you can make more doors. You see how this goes? You can do the house however you want. Moving up to that second floor, I want you to think about what are the things that have helped you cope? And you can jot those down on that second floor. Things that have helped you cope with your grief. Moving up to that third floor, is there anything positive? Positive things that have come from your grief journey? It's the third floor. We might not be up there yet. So it's okay to leave that one blank. Now, on the outside of your walls, up and down the outside of the walls of the house, write what supports you. What supports you? On the outside of the roof of the house, so those lines right there, write what protects you, who or what protects you. In that attic space, write what your hope for the future is. What is your hope for the future? And in the final two spaces, up here, where the chimney is blowing smoke, when you're feeling grief, how do you blow off steam? I mean, it's kind of a tongue-in-cheek image, right? How do you blow off steam? And then this flag that's flying in your front yard, if there were just one thing that you wanted someone else to know, what do you want someone to know? Write it in that flag. And as you finish up, I'm just going to give you 1 or 2 minutes. If there's anything you want to share with your table, you can either talk about how the exercise was for you. That way you don't actually have to talk about what you wrote down. It was a good exercise, it was a hard, it was difficult. Or if there's one in particular thing that you wrote down that was kind of an aha, you can share that with your table. So how was the exercise and what did you learn?
Can you say more about that? Because I'm not seeing that connection.
Which, that should be no surprise in a way either. Christian faith, yeah. And maybe that comes back then to the idea, or the truthfulness, that there are different, not only different types of grief, but different levels or degrees, maybe we could say, of grief too, and yeah.
That'd be interesting. I am too. Other languages there probably is.
Yeah, I take people off guard with my snarky humor
church would,
a lot,
church
and they.
situation
But I think
change.
your point is really valid. Like, because I
Change
can
that we
laugh
weren't-
and I laugh
that we
in
didn't
public,
ask for.
people think I, number one, can carry the world.
Sorry, there wasn't a sheet left for you.
I tried.
That's okay. You gave me yours.
I got breakfast sheets at home.
You got some extra sheets at
Yeah,
home? Yeah,
probably.
okay. It came from you?
The Ways the Dead Shall Speak, yeah, it's a, he's a funeral director, he's actually written 2 books.
Yep.
This is the second one, and so what he talks about, they're based on true stories, and he talks about kind of the different ways the that people do funerals in the different ways that they also process that grief. You know, different cultural experiences. His family he's a sixth generation funeral director, and so he talks a lot about how, you know, his family history kind of lives, you know, through him at the same time, and what a burden that carries. And actually, he reveals at the end that he doesn't want to be a funeral director anymore because it's too much of a burden, you know. So, and just how that, you know, yeah, I mean, I think it's really good. I'm going to try to go back and read his first book, but I haven't done that yet. Yeah. So, but this idea that it kind of lives, these people that have in the past still live within you. And there's actually another thing, and this is a scientific thing, but I don't know if you've heard of epigenetics or not. So epigenetics is kind of interesting. It's this idea that your experiences can actually modify your DNA and then kind of be passed, you know, through to your offspring. And so
I am noticing that just how deep and vulnerable some of the stories have gotten, and I just want to name that and honor that and say thank you for, over the course of 4 weeks, getting that vulnerable with each other. And yeah, thank you for that vulnerability with each other. Is there anything from that exercise that you would like to share with the larger group? And then what I want us to do is spend the last 5 minutes talking about what we might do together next. You know, what do you need after, you know, we've just spent 4 weeks learning a language together. So what do you need from the church next? So any thoughts from the exercise?
Oh, she's got one, the table one.
Oh, it's on the table.
They were just asking me about the book that you had mentioned earlier that I read. And there's actually an interesting concept now that scientists are exploring called epigenetics. And it's this idea that the experiences that you have modify your DNA chemically, and then you can pass that on to the people that you know are your offspring. And so this idea that all the experiences, if this is true, you know, all the experiences that your ancestors have had, you know, good and bad, are still kind of living within you, you know, in the same way. So he talks about this concept in the book a little bit. And I think it's an interesting idea because you think about, you know, the connectivity. And so in some ways, you're carrying the joy and the grief from all those people that came from you, and then all the people that, you know, follow you are also going to be doing that. And it creates some connectedness that puts a different spin on how you think about, you know, grief, if that makes sense. It's called All the Ways the Dead Still Speak. And I can't remember the author's name off the top of my head, but he's a funeral director, sixth-generation funeral director from Pennsylvania.
Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't know whether I wanted to bring this up or not, but we're all aware that Meeting House is going through a transition. And my wife and I were members here for a long time, from 2011 up to about 5 years ago. We've come and gone. And the sense I get is that the church, and I think most people, I hope they admit this, is going through an early stage of grief. And
We talked about that for week one.
Yeah, I know, I understand that. But I want to get to something I said at the beginning when you answered that question, is that these are opportunities to celebrate where we've been and where we're going to go, and to go positively. I was here Sunday, and I left here, and I said it felt like a wake.
Right.
Heard Patrick talk at the traditional service, and I watched some stuff online, and the results of the meetings and so on. And really, this is a wonderful opportunity to look forward positively and joyously. Yeah. And I don't get that sense now, so maybe you can answer me how, how is that moving forward?
5 minutes or less. All I can say is I'm going to guest preach on Sunday, and it's not going to be a wake. If I have to, I'll bring my tuba.
Okay, so we all know that when you learn a new language, the only way it sticks is to practice. So what I'm saying what we need is we need to meet more and practice and practice and practice and practice and practice. And so then when we have these meetings, we can get to the point of joyful moving forward, but we're not going to do that, as you've shared that with us. We're not going to do that until we are sad and disappointed and angry and do all of that. And then we have this shared way of, I keep saying to Dave, my spouse, I hope we can find our way back to each other. And Dave and I are together. I'm talking about us.
The community.
The community
Yeah.
of the church. Dave and I
Yeah.
are fine. But I'm talking about our faith community because it feels like we're in a corn maze.
Yeah.
And not on a labyrinth.
Yeah.
And how can we find our way? And do we want to?
Yeah. Yeah.
In all the different ways we sing and express and listen and enjoy a faithful God. So I think we need more practice, and I hope that there will be ways in which we will all be able to convene continuously and get more exposure to these different ways of knowing and learning. Just the videos were really helpful.
I do. I lead this grief group in Chaska Community Center, and we've been together for a year and a half, 18 months now. We meet every other week. We have watched so many YouTube videos. I have like a list of 7-minute YouTube videos that's like a mile long. And it gets into the brain science of grief, and it gets into the traditions of grief, and it gets into, lots and lots and lots of different thoughts about grief. It's like the Pandora's box. The more you open it up, the more, stuff comes out. And the one thing I would say, I sometimes have one of my exercises is to have you think through a simile. Grief is like a, and then you fill in the blank. People come up with tons of different stuff. Grief is like a house plant. Some days you have to water it, some days you don't. Some days you forget it's there, but it's always going to live in your house. Grief is like Jim's analogy about grief being music, and it becomes the baseline for that is beautiful. One person one time said, grief is like a beach ball. The more you try and push it under the water, the more it's going to pop out sideways. If I were to give just one piece of advice to this community regarding the changes that are coming, is the more we push it under the water and pretend not to talk about it and pretend that it's not there, the more it's just going to keep on popping out. And that we should just practice talking about it and finding our way back to each other.
Monday, there's that special program here about a grief service, I think, and other things. But unfortunately, I'm going to be at the cabin. But will that labyrinth and some of those things be around after that day, or only on that day only?
I do not know. I don't know. I haven't.
So I'll be back in a few days, so I just thought.
Yeah.
I was like doing that labyrinth.
Right, yeah. I mean, I would put in a call to the church and ask somebody who's on staff about that.
How many of you know Rachel Held Evans? I know who she is. All right. I gave her a hug 6 months before she died. She was close to me. Her sister wrote a book, Amanda Held, which talks about the traditions of grief, and she wrote it after her sister died. And this is just, I will start crying, but it's an amazing book. It's Rachel Hild, yep, that one. Just bring that one up. Just click on it. So get this book and get the audio version of it, because Amanda reads her own book. And she has this beautiful Tennessee accent. It's just amazing. Okay, and then bring up the other one about saying Kaddish. And then the other book we talked about was Saying Kaddish, who's written by the same woman who wrote The Red Tent. Anybody read The Red Tent? Who's the author? Do you remember? Yep, Anita Diamant wrote this book, Saying Kaddish, where she talks about all the Jewish traditions which have gone back millennia surrounding grief. And I'm curious if we've been toying with the idea of doing something around this book early next spring, and having a rabbi or a cantor come in and talk to us about this tradition, because it's so healthy and so rich. They have circles of protection around the grieving person that's between death and the funeral, and then the next 7 days is sitting Shiva, which is the Hebrew word for 7. And then they have a 30-day and then a year-long one. And it's amazing. And we'd love to have feedback on that.
So, all of this is to say, what would you like to do next? And, you know, it feels like the first word is continue. And so we have lots of ideas, and I would, I'm a facilitator. I like to say that. So like, bring me your poems, bring me your books, bring me your experience, bring me your expertise. Because you have it, we all have it, right? If we have grief, we are experts on grief too. I'm conscious that we have gone over time, and I don't like to go over time. So I do want to end, and I'm here as long as you need me to be here, so you guys can feel free to sit and continue to talk. That's perfectly fine. Elgin.
Can we have a class or classes on moving from awake to moving to joy in the morning?
Can we? Yeah. I mean, I can't say yes to anything.
Go ahead.
Because I am not an employee of this church. But I can give all of these ideas back to the staff, and we certainly, they were very open to Jim's idea, and, I'm sure they are going to be open to anything that we bring to them.
You've got some credibility here because of the attendance here.
Right.
I mean, this is good attendance. Class at Colonial, so.
Yeah.
Usually it's the law of diminishing returns. The classes get smaller.
We got bigger.
Last class, you're only 2 people left.
Yeah, we got bigger. So.
The people you're saying they will accept it. Who are they?
At this point, the staff right now, I would address it to Christian Wynn, Mark Patrick. Anybody else? This would fall under adult education. So that would be under Christian Collins Wynn. Yeah.
And so if we say we want Cathy on Wednesday night from 6:30 to 7:30, and you say, yeah, that's nice, but no thank you, then we're all in trouble. Because I'm hearing that there's some interest, but if that doesn't work in your schedule, then, so I guess I'm asking a soft yes, like if we want this, would you consider it?
So we are gonna, Christian is gonna think through ideas. I'm not stepping on anybody's toes. Christian is gonna think through ideas, probably with the board, probably with the Christian Education Committee, Adult Education Committee. They will come up with a plan. It might be me, it might not be me. But I think we have gifted leaders among us as well. It might be multiple things. It might be me on one night and somebody else on a different night.
One step to take, today's e-news that came out from the church had an opportunity to go on a survey and check off the kind of things that you want. Because what's going to happen here, I wish I were a pastor, a young pastor, looking for a church like this, that in transition, gone through at a wake, and go in here and wake it up, and maybe take it into a new direction, you know, and our opportunity here now is to lay the groundwork for whoever makes the decision whom is going to be the leader, because that's what's going to happen.
And I really, really want to respect your time. So do we have time to close with one last poem or not? Yes, okay. Always time for a poem. Thank you. This is Khalil Gibran, who is you know him. Lots of people are smiling. Good. I don't even have to introduce him then. 15th century mystic? 14th? Something like that? I'm not good with dates. Bestseller. Of all, yeah. This poem is called Joy and Sorrow, Chapter 8. Then a woman said, "Speak to us of joy and sorrow." And he answered, "Your joy is your sorrow unmasked. And the selfsame well from which your laughter rises was oftentimes filled with your tears. And how else can it be? The deeper that sorrow carves into your being, the more joy you can contain. Is not the cup that holds your wine the very cup that was burned in the potter's oven? And is not the lute that soothes your spirit the very wood that was hollowed out with knives? When you are joyous, look deep into your heart, and you shall find it is only that which has given you sorrow that is now giving you joy. When you are sorrowful, look again in your heart, and you shall see that in truth you are weeping for that which has been your delight. Some of you say joy is greater than sorrow, and others, nay, sorrow is greater. But I say unto you, they are inseparable. Together they come, and when one sits alone with you at your board, remember that the other is asleep upon your bed. Verily, you are suspended like scales between your sorrow and your joy. Only when you are empty are you at standstill and balanced. When the treasure keeper lifts you to weigh his gold and his silver, the needs must your joy or your sorrow rise or fall. Amen. Thank you all for being with us for 4 weeks. Thank you for sharing the poem. Andrea.
Don't forget to change our clocks on Saturday.
Andrea has asked me to announce that Saturday is daylight savings time, so remember to fall back and change your calendar, or change your clock. Thank you, Andrea. Sunday, 2 a.m.